Night Stalker. When I was a child, I used to have a dream where I would be mauled by a black panther. There are no panthers here. I live in a small town in southern Ontario with nothing to do, filled with do-nothings and semi-rural town mice. But in my young mind, all the facts I could pick up about the world outside of our community, any facts about exotic worlds abroad, large and more interesting animals, and things generally not seen around these parts, could easily meld together in my dreams. It was a dream I had relatively often, and I had nightmares regularly. This is one of those vivid dreams that just stuck with me in the back of my head even into adulthood as I sit here and recall it to you now. I grew up with an avid love of the outdoors and subsequently spent the majority of my life, seasons permitting, hiking, camping, and swimming in the tame and domestic landscape of my home county along the north shore of Lake Erie. Eventually, I got older, left home, and often I would try to plan vacations all around the province. I camped under the stars in Bruce County and listened to the haunting calls of loons as they sang to each other in the cool late summer night. I slept in a one-room cabin and fished for my meals on the still and pristine waters of Marshall Lake, near Lake Nipissing. I planned my first portage at age 21 in Algonquin Park, where I saw moose, black bears, and beavers. The outdoors is what I grew to consider my own individual sacred space. I could go there and be human without all the modern humanity, and still to this day, it is something my life basically revolves around. I have never questioned this, save for one time. Now, I have always seen myself as a rational person. I'm not a snob about religion or people who believe in whatever they do, but I tend to err on the side of science and logical thinking more than anything. There are many forces at work, and nearly all of them have rational, scientific explanations. Those that don't simply don't yet have solid explanations. But I have no idea what happened to me during the course of the story I am about to share, and I have never experienced anything like it since then. All things considered, I really hope I never do. It was a night I'll never forget, a night when I ventured deep into the heart of the northern Ontario wilderness and came face to face with the unimaginable. I won't tell you exactly where it was, simply to ensure that nobody with inclinations to do so might go looking for a similar experience. The forests here are unlike any I had ever encountered before, dense and ancient, with towering pine and spruce trees that seemed to scrape the very heavens. The ground was blanketed in a lush carpet of moss and ferns, and the air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I had set up camp by the shores of a serene, mirror-like lake, its surface reflecting the canopy of stars overhead. The moon cast an ethereal glow on the landscape, but the silence was unsettling, as if the woods held their breath, concealing secrets as old as time itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, soft shadows that danced among the trees, I built a small fire to ward off the encroaching darkness. My curiosity had brought me to this remote corner of northern Ontario, having long sought to visit more isolated locations further north of Algonquin. The thought of following in the footsteps of my own forebears who came to this country as trappers was something I always wanted to pursue. I imagined them traveling through parts similar to these as they portaged through thick brush on the way to the nearby river just out of sight in the now darkening treescape. I take pride in my heritage and the country I live in, and I have always been more than keen to get out there and see everything this beautiful wilderness has to offer. I have seen a lot and am well-traveled, a seasoned woodsman at this point in my life. There's not much that can shock me out here, but any naturalist will tell you that nature always finds a way to humble those who think they've seen it all, and what happened to me next was something that I never would have anticipated in my life, and it shook me to my core. As I sat by the fire, my heart sank beneath a growing unease, a feeling that I was not alone, that unseen eyes were fixed upon me. I dismissed it as mere paranoia, convincing myself that it was the wild imagination of an urban dweller in the wilderness. Yet, the unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. Then, it happened, a blood-curdling howl that pierced the silence of the night. It echoed through the forest, a haunting lament that seemed to reverberate through the very trees themselves. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and I knew that this was no ordinary sound. The howl came again, closer this time, carrying with it a malevolence that seemed to seep into my very bones. Panic surged within me, and I fumbled to grab my flashlight, the feeble beam casting trembling shadows on the ancient trees. And then, I saw a creature emerging from the shadows, a nightmare in the form of a sleek knight. Its fur was as dark as the depths of the abyss, and its eyes, two crimson orbs, burned with an otherworldly fire. It moved with a predatory grace, its sleek form almost melting into the enveloping darkness. My flashlight's beam danced over the creature, revealing gleaming, razor-sharp claws that seemed to shimmer in the night. At that moment, the very fabric of reality seemed to fray, and I could feel an invasive presence in my mind, like tendrils of darkness wrapping around my thoughts. My voice caught in my throat as I tried to scream, but sheer terror propelled me to my feet, and I fled from the campsite, leaving behind my possessions and any semblance of reason. Behind me, I could hear haunting laughter, a sound that reverberated through the ancient trees and seemed to mock my feeble escape. I fled from the campsite, my heart pounding in my chest, as I made my way through the tangled undergrowth of the northern Ontario wilderness. The creature, the nightmare with gleaming crimson eyes, pursued me relentlessly, its sinister laughter echoing through the trees. I tripped over a gnarled tree root hidden beneath the mossy forest floor. I tumbled forward, hitting the ground hard, and the wind knocked out of me. Gasping for breath, I tried to push myself up, but a searing pain shot through my ankle, bringing me back down flat on my face again. As I looked up from the ground, I couldn't believe my eyes. The creature, the hulking, cat-like terror, seemed to dematerialize right before me. It was as if it had dissolved into the very shadows it came from. Relief washed over me. I let my guard down, thinking I had escaped. I looked around and saw nothing. As I started to calm down, any sense of ease started to wane as I realized the woods around me were still as if time had stopped. Not a whisper of the wind or a rustling branch made a sound, and the chatter of frogs and crickets fell mute as if they had all simply vanished. I quickly got back up on my feet and, keeping low and as quiet as possible, started to make my way back out towards the valley that held the nearby dirt road I took to get into these woods. The way out was still a long way away, but at least on the trail, I could put some serious distance between myself and the deeper forest and get back into civilization. But then, out of nowhere, the creature seemed to just sort of spawn in, its shape coming into a material form from the darkness. It was there, looming over me with those malevolent crimson eyes, as if mocking my brief respite. Panic surged through me once more, and I scrambled to get out of there. The chase continued, the creature stalking me with an unearthly determination. I pushed through the wilderness, down into the valley, and back onto the path, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps like daggers in my lungs, my heart a relentless drumbeat in my chest, no longer a concern as I sped through the wilderness. The trees seemed to close in around me, the night air growing colder and thicker with each passing moment. I couldn't shake the feeling that this creature, this thing, was toying with me, relishing in the fear it had instilled. The forest itself seemed to conspire against me as if it were part of the creature's malevolent design. With every ounce of strength and determination, I pressed on, driven by the primal instinct to survive and the chilling realization that there was no escape from the unknown terror that lurked in the heart of the wilderness. The pathway seemed to stretch to double, maybe triple its length. It seemed to wind and veer off in ways that I didn't remember it doing before. At this point, I was so stricken with fear I couldn't even begin to question it. I just kept moving. There was no way this trail was the wrong one. This was the only access into these woods at the valley. It must have been me. If I didn't die in there, I would surely go mad if I didn't escape. After what seemed like hours longer than I knew the journey down the trail to take, I finally came to familiar landmarks telling me the end of the trail and where I had parked my truck. I emerged from the wilderness, shaken and disoriented, but with an overwhelming sense of relief that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. I can't shake the feeling that things still watches and waits, just beyond the edge of the darkness, in the heart of northern Ontario's ancient and untamed wilderness. Years later, I am still wrapping my head around what happened to me. I haven't really found anything outside the realm of urban legends or cougar encounters. Right now, this creature, in my mind, could not have been a cougar. This thing was massive. I am aware that in parts it sounds like a cougar account, but this thing howled. I'm not sure what it is that chased me that night, but I am dead certain of two things. One, if that thing got a hold of me, I would have been ripped apart and no more if I were anything less than the luckiest person on the planet. Two, I have way more of those nightmares of being mauled by a panther these days. True ghost story. A lot of my memories of childhood have faded with age, but this one horrific memory seems to have withstood the test of time. I was around 5 years old, and growing up in a little town was quite boring, but having an older sister to follow around every day gave me some interesting memories, and I guess this is one. My older sister had the typical job of babysitting our next-door neighbor's 2 kids, and while my mother would work late, I would accompany my sister babysitting. Now, to give you some idea of our neighborhood, we lived in a cul-de-sac, with our house being in the middle next to our neighbors that my sister babysat for, and my aunt and older cousin's home being at the forefront of the cul-de-sac. So on this evening, we went next door to babysit our neighbor's 2 kids with explicit instructions from our mother to go to our aunt's house and stay with our older cousin after we finished babysitting and wait for her to come home from work, which was our normal routine anyway. Our aunt was a registered critical care nurse, so she was at work for odd hours too. We babysat and had a ball playing with our neighbors until their mom got home, and my sister and I peeked out of their kitchen window looking across the cul-de-sac to see our older cousin's red VW Jetta in her driveway. So we bid them good night, and my sister took my hand to walk across to our aunt's house. Now, when we walked up assuming our cousin was home, we noticed the hall light on through the little side window at the front door, so we knocked. And after like 5 minutes, I remember my sister yelling out my cousin's name only to then notice the hall light click off. So thinking our cousin was playing a mean trick on us at like 11 o'clock at night, my sister pulled my hand and we began to walk down the driveway in order to go back to our neighbors and use their phones. Mind you, this was in the early 90s, so cell phones weren't everywhere yet. As we left the driveway to cross the street of the cul-de-sac, I remember feeling a static charge up my back and my sister's grip on my hand tightening. I turned to look back at my aunt's home and saw what I can only describe as 3 white mists shaped like humans with no discernible facial features standing on her front lawn. My sister pulled my arm and we ran to our neighbor's house and banged on her door, which she promptly answered and ushered us inside. We tried to tell her what happened, but she shrugged it off and told us to wait there for our mom to come home. While waiting, my sister and I heard a car idling and peeked out of her kitchen window again only to see our cousin, who drove that red Jetta being dropped off by her then boyfriend. No one was home while we were knocking. Later on, when we got older, we found out that before our family had purchased that house across from my aunt, she had tried nursing her mother-in-law back to health, and she ended up passing away in that very same house. So who knows why we saw 3 ghostly apparitions instead of just one. However, it was confirmed that at least one death occurred on our aunt's property. Needless to say, none of our cousins nor my aunt likes hearing my sister and I retell that creepy, unforgettable experience to this very day. Mom and me in the attic? So I'm a very cute little tough 7-year-old, and I love watching scary movies with my mom. Friday Night Creature Features was one of Mom and me's favorites, but she worked a lot on the weekends cause she was a bartender, so when she was home on a rare Friday night, I could barely contain my excitement. Did I mention we lived with my great-grandmother and my mom's room was in the attic? Not your typical insulation everywhere attic. Nope, this attic was creepy. Walk in the front door and straight up a very long staircase, at least to a 7-year-old cute tough little girl. So at the top you have a bit of a room, very small boxes and junk stacked up. Turn to the right my mom's room, turn to the left my uncle's room. Coolest uncle to ever live, to a cute tough 7-year-old. Anyhow, me and Mom are on her gigantic bed. Looking back, it was probably a standard, but to me, it was an entire hideout with perfectly cozy blankets and pillows to cozy up in and watch creature features. Well, we get settled into watch and my mom tells me to go get her a Coke and I can get cookies and milk for me, yay. I jump down the stairs like a bunny and my great-grandma and great-grandpa are on the couch watching something I'm so not interested in, like Gunsmoke or Lawrence Welk, I don't know, but you get it, something like that. I skip into the kitchen and I'm getting my mom's Coke and my milk out of the fridge and I grab way too many cookies, so I hide some in my pockets, not slightly concerned they will be crumbs when I get back upstairs. When I'm walking through the living room to go back up, my grandma says, "Annette, you know you are busted tone. Are you taking that Coke up to your uncle?" I shook my head no and said nope to my mom. She had a hankering for one. My grandma laughed hard and even gave my grandpa a tap on the arm and kind of tilted her head at me, and in between laughs she said, "Did you hear that, Kenneth?" She said, "Hankering now, where do you imagine she got that, Kenneth?" And she laughed and laughed like as if she was watching Groucho Marx, who she thought was the funniest actor ever. And then she said, "Geraldine." I figured I was in trouble. She used my middle name. I switch my gaze to the floor and hang my head and say, "Yes, ma'am." And I'm thinking I'm going down for those extra cookies, this is it. And she tells me as I inhale enough to make my chest stick out, "You know your mother left for work 2 hours ago." I exhaled and brought my eyes right back up to look at her with a wide-eyed glare now, and uttered, "No, Grandma, she is upstairs. We are gonna watch creature features. It's the creature from the Black Lagoon. We haven't seen that one." And she brushed my hair, see, and I kinda flipped my hair off my shoulder in a kinda defiant way that a cute tough 7-year-old would do. And my grandpa said, "Look outside, her car ain't there." She had a brand new sky blue Bug, and I half ran to the window and pulled the long green curtains back just enough for me to look out. Looking back and forth in front of the house, my shoulders kind of fell. My grandma said, "You must have fell to sleep and had one of your dreams, camera, and watched TV with me and Gramps." I shook my head no and turned and ran upstairs. Slowly I crept into Mom's room, knowing she would be there, pretending she was mad I took so long and tickling me mercilessly for it. Once I settled next to her on the bed, and she did, and I laughed and laughed until the creature features intro started. Then I curled up so close to my mom to watch the movie, and as my mom said at the end, "That was scary as hell." "It sure was, Mom," I said. "Now let's go to sleep," she whispered, and we did. My grandmother. I lived in California for most of my childhood, but a month before I turned 12, my family and I moved to Oregon to better our lives. Just about 7 years later, my life has changed drastically. Let's start with my grandmother. During the whole moving process, she was babysitting myself and my brother while my dad was taking my mom and sisters up to Oregon. Her behavior then started to change a little bit. For example, every now and then she would claim to have bugs falling from her face or see something that wasn't really there. But ever since my family started living in Oregon, she has gone missing. Nobody knew where she went or what happened to her, and she was presumed to be dead by everyone that knew her. Then one night I heard a tapping rhythm on my window. Tap, 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 tap. "Hey, is anyone home?" I heard from outside my window. I was half asleep and didn't think twice about what was happening. Tap, 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 tap. "Hello?" I finally realized what I was hearing. It sounded like my grandma's voice coming from outside my window. I didn't dare to open my blinds and check those, so I went to my mother's room and told her what I was hearing, but she obviously didn't believe me because we lived 1,000 miles away from where we last saw/heard from my grandma. My mother gets out of bed and goes with me to check from a different window that has a view of my bedroom window to see who is outside. We open the blinds and let our eyes adjust to the darkness outside. And in disbelief, we see my grandmother standing outside of my window holding a knife, smiling. Good thing she didn't notice us. My mother told me to call the cops, so I did. Approximately 20 minutes passed before they got to our house. We opened the front door to tell them what the situation was. They searched the property and came back to tell us that there was no one there. Then they left. How my grandma found out where we lived and left without us noticing is beyond me. I just hope she doesn't find her way back here again. The hills are alive. There was a period of my life when I chose to be homeless. It may seem strange to you, but the town I lived in had extremely unaffordable rental prices, and I preferred to lay out under the stars and fall asleep to the sound of the water running in the nearby creek and waking up to the chirping of birds. I had a decent job, strictly for saving up money that would enable me to travel, so my paychecks were never cashed, but rather stayed at my good buddy's house, just piling and piling up into a thick stack of paper for future deposit. I figured I would cash them all shortly prior to taxes being due. Not having a bank, because I don't like or trust them, I usually dealt with straight cash, and if I had to use a card, I'd transfer it into my PayPal account. That's about as close to a bank as I wanted to get. Food was never an issue. Either my boss would provide meals at my worksite, or I would visit a few out of the many food banks in the city. If I really needed it, I could go on food stamps, but that is a government program that is better suited for individuals who truly need it, and I did not want to take advantage since I could viably attain my own food. My free time was spent reading at the library while I charged my cell phone, or I would use the computers if I needed to use a keyboard for an extended amount of time. There were showers every other day right next door, at no expense, so I took advantage of that. Many times I would take a shower at my buddy's house, where I spent many evenings playing dice games or cribbage, watching movies, etc., etc. My homelessness was optional and I wanted for nothing. It was not without hardships or inconveniences, though. There were nights spent just wandering around, stumbling onto somebody else's site and being run off. There were mornings when I woke up to find out I'd been robbed while I slept. Once I got jerked awake by some meth head who thought he was picking up his own sleeping bag and didn't notice me inside it. He yelled at me a bit, then took a piss next to my head and stumbled off. After a while, I found a camping spot that was ideal for camping. It was on the outskirts of town, off into the rolling green hills that were covered with dense patches of trees and labyrinthine creeks. My camping spot was on the top of a terrace, with running water nearby, encircled by thick trees, and completely flat and soft. It was difficult to find, which meant feeling anxious about others encroaching on my area was unnecessary. Among the hills where this location is, however, is imbued with rumors and legends. The story goes that on the cusp of the 19th and 20th centuries, it was a mine of sorts. Whether it was silver or gold or something else, I have never been able to unravel through any research. Onward, the legend persists that the mine collapsed and was abandoned and basically forgotten. Townspeople and generations that came before them never could quite pinpoint the location of this supposed mine. There were many such landmarks supposedly in the hills that nobody could quite locate but insisted were up there. According to some, there was a cannon just abandoned and forsaken up on one of the numerous unnamed hillsand. On another hill, rumor has it there was a desolate bell tower with the bell still intact. Many have claimed to see parts of an airplane that crashed decades ago and simply were never removed due to the logistics of moving heavy parts in inaccessible terrain. Many years after the mine supposedly collapsed and onward into the 1920s, some of the tunnels into the mine were cleared out and used as some sort of federally funded bunker that served as a laboratory, carrying on the legacy of secrecy and myth. This myth was most likely created due to the amount of biology and agricultural students that attended the town university. Locals as old as the hills of the town would tell stories about animals being genetically engineered. On old timer told me and my friends that there were scientists of some sort hidden in the hills, experimenting and creating cougars that walked on all four legs, but had the feathery face of a raptor, a bird of prey. Hawk-like and demonish. Some other locals spoke of giant rats with the head of a wolfhound. This, of course, is all bogus, and I don't believe in any of it. It's ridiculous to think such things. These are fairy tales, boogeyman accounts, and fireside horror. I never gave any of these stories any credence, and I still am not quite sure that I do to this day, but there is a spookiness on top of those rolling hills. Some nights, sleeping up there, it got strange. Once I had been woken up by the sound of a vehicle. It sparked my curiosity because there weren't even any functioning fire roads anymore. Unmistakably, it was the sound of a truck. When I roused myself out of my sleeping bag, followed the noises, and peered out through the dense trees and downward towards the town, sure enough, there was a pickup truck driving below me towards some spot in the hills that I was unfamiliar with. To me, it seemed as if it were a government truck. It was all white with the city emblem on the door. The lights were bright. The speed was consistent. The pathway it drove on seemed rugged and difficult, but the vehicle was deliberate. It knew exactly where it was going. The evening after that, before sundown, I chose to explore the path that I had seen the truck driving, following the crushed down grass and weeds. But after a while, it just got too rocky and difficult to determine where the tracks were, and though I combed the area as well as I could, I never found anything other than more hills, tiny creeks, and patches of trees. A month or so after that, in the middle of the night, I was roused by something walking in the brush that enveloped me. Whatever it was massive. We don't have big animals in my area. Raccoons, possums, and things like that are about all anybody would ever see. We did have a cougar every now and then, and packs of coyotes. I've lived in various wildernesses all my life. I know the sound of every footfall of just about every mammal in North America, almost. The sound of the steps was heavy, big and rough, slow, purposeful. It was no cougar. Most of the time you aren't lucky enough to hear them until it's too late. It wasn't a coyote either unless it was the size of a Volkswagen Bug. The steps went in circles around me, round and around. It's as if it didn't want to get too close, or perhaps was considering closing in. Just biding time or something. I lifted my head out of wanting to get a better look, but the darkness wouldn't allow it. That's when the growling began. Low, deep, threatening growls. Not the growls of a raccoon, not the growls of a person or a dog. It was way too low of pitch for that, and the volume was unthinkable. The duration was impressive. The sound was seemingly long, almost a minute without stopping between. I could not move. I lay there, too scared to even shake, to breathe, to scream. I became a statue lying in a sleeping bag. My mind raced, going over every animal I could think of, could possibly imagine, all while whispering to myself, "What is that? What is that? What the hell is that?" After I don't know how long, the footsteps faded away, returning back to wherever they came from, back off down into the hills below. I turned on my flashlight, scrambled out of my sleeping bag, and walked toward the tree lane without bothering to put on my boots. All around I searched and found no tracks or marks or any indication anything had ever been there. I went into the thick patch of trees and shined the light down onto the hill and saw no movement, no life, all was still. I was barking up the wrong tree. Returning to my campsite, I sat down on one of the logs I used as my sitting spot and shivered nervously until the day broke. That spot for a few more months until three things happened in a short amount of time that made me decide I had had enough. One night, randomly, I woke up to the sound of walking, lifted my head from my sleeping bag, and saw a woman just walking past my sight. She did not acknowledge me. She did not say a word. Clad in normal wear, she walked onward, out of my sight and away from me. She had no hiking boots or backpack. She appeared to be just a normal person. However, it was 3 a.m. and there would be no reason for some lady to be walking out in this part of the hills this early in the morning. I had a cell phone that had an alarm on it, and it would wake me up every weekday at 5:30 a.m. It was very distinct, and it had been the same tone for 2 or 3 years. One of the nights I woke up with an unyielding necessity to relinquish my bodily fluids. Scrambling out of my sleeping bag and placing my boots on my feet, I looked up at the clear sky, enjoying the chirps of the crickets as I walked 50 feet into the bushes to take a number one. As I stood there doing my business, I heard my cell phone alarm going off. 5:30 already? I asked myself. Suddenly it hit me. It wasn't my alarm, it was whistling. Somebody or something nearby was whistling the exact same melody as my phone alarm. Same duration, volume, pitch, all of it. A perfect replica. Upon this realization, I whirled around without even zipping up. "Hello?" I shouted out into the void. "Who's there?" The whistling stopped and all was silent. All was still. A moment or two went by and the crickets picked back up again. I rushed to my sleeping bag and hid myself inside it as much as I possibly could. I was in a cocoon of fear, sobbing to myself in the darkness, mumbling, "That was weird, that was so weird." Mentioning this to anybody else did not seem like the best concept to me at the time. Very few people knew how I lived, and I didn't want to invite any sort of harassment into it. I didn't wager that people would understand my decision to be homeless. Also, the collection of stories just seemed crazy and unbelievable. Of course, there are many homeless people who are not on drugs and are not crazy, but there are definitely those that are, and I felt if I were to tell my accounts to anybody, I would certainly be taken for a madman or on drugs or both. When I got out of work that day, I had enough light to go exploring. I went off into the same hills I always had, but this time I took a different route. It had an obscure entrance, and unless you really knew the area, it was invisible to the untrained eye. The pathway was steep, arduous, daunting. Every now and again, I would place my eyes on the hill where I knew my campsite lay, allowing me to get more and more lost in the unexplored jungle that so many locals never bothered to set foot in. An hour followed by me randomly walking until I came up a hill with a sudden drop. To the side, there was a decline. A small grade. Taking one of the grades on the side led me down to a flat bottom, and I realized why it looked like the hill suddenly dropped off. It was a tunnel. A tunnel that was packed to the brim with colossal stones. On either side of the tunnel were large wooden beams, with a gigantic one resting on top of the other two. Mine, I whispered to myself. I was in disbelief. I had actually found it. I don't remember what path I took to stumble onto it, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to stumble onto it ever again, but there it was. It was the abandoned mine long lost to many memories. I chuckled proudly to myself, mostly out of discomfort, then noticed that it would be getting dim soon, and thus decided to return to my camp. 2 steps were taken, and then I noticed it. A large metal box. I'd wager it was 10 feet long by 8 feet wide, made out of steel and beginning to rust red, with holes lined up around it. It looked like a storage container, but smaller. Like a cage. A cage where the door was unlatched and wide open. It made me feel overwhelmed with dread. It seemed like something was in that cage. Something alive. Whatever that something was, it was out now. I rushed back to my camp, and as I did my best to ignore the eerie feeling of the sight as I sat down on my log by my sleeping bag. Something inside me told me things weren't quite right. That night I had trouble falling asleep. I lay there trying to decide if I needed to find another spot, cash one of my paychecks, and get a hotel or crash on one of my friends' couches. I just wasn't sure. I wasn't even sure if I knew if I was insane or not. I questioned myself many times. Thoughts invaded my brain, wondering if that government truck had a purpose for being up in the unnamed hills. Perhaps the truck arrived there to unleash a demon from a cage. Perhaps there was a lady up in the hills that served as a caged creature keeper. That's when I heard my own voice coming out of the bushes, crying out, "That was weird, that was so weird." I jumped out of my sleeping bag like a bullet leaves a barrel. I snatched my backpack and I ran like an Olympian down the hill as quickly as my legs had ever carried me. I left my sleeping bag and my blanket up on the top and never retrieved them. The next day, I cashed my paychecks and made a deposit for a room to rent in a nice house downtown, in the middle of civilization. Away from the creeks and the hills and the trees. I often reflect on this duration of my life. I constantly question what happened. Some will say that there is no predator in nature that is more dangerous than mankind. I am not so sure about that. I am of the mind that the most terrifying thing to cross paths with are the things that make no sense, the things that are unbelievable, the things that are unknown. Real life chase. It was 2023 around March or April. I and my friends decided it would be a good idea to cherry knock, knocking on people's doors and running away, but then it escalated and we ended up buying eggs. Eventually, we found a house that we decided to sell. We were a group of 4, 2 of us would egg the house and 2 would run. I was one to egg the house with my friend Gabby. We egged the house and got away pretty successfully. Then we moved on to our second house and Paige and Lacey didn't want to do it, so me and Gabby did it again. This time we were running uphill and Gabby, being stupid, stopped midway, and a man in his 20s, blonde, scratchy beard and about 5'10" was behind her. I told her to hurry up and we ran and he chased us. My friends knew their way around this end of the area, but I had no clue, so I stayed behind them. We hid behind a wall, but it's tricky to explain. The wall faces the houses and you can park your cars behind the wall. We ran to where this place was and I tried to hop a fence, but it was too tall, so we hid behind the wall. My stupid friend Lacey stepped in those marble stones people put in their front garden, and the man must have heard, but another voice was speaking to him. They started shouting out, "We can fucking hear you, are not stupid." So I decided I'd be smart and split up from them. I crouched against the wall and then tried to go up the stairs, thinking that they'd go to where Lacey made the noise. These dumb idiots came down the stairs as I went up them and they started cussing me out. Rightfully so. But I made out I had just come out of my house and was going to meet my friend. They showed me a picture of my outfit on the Ring doorbell, but you couldn't see my face really. I forgot to mention, when we were buying the eggs we bought a Pepsi and made out we were making omelets. I had it in my hand, so I just carried on walking, and then he tried to grab me, so I dashed it in his face and sprinted, but running in Air Forces back down a hill is hard. Plus I didn't know where I was at all because I'd never been here before. So I just jumped into a bush when I got around the corner. This bush had a house behind it and I saw them run past me down the street, so I ran the opposite way. I heard them call out to each other saying I was over there, and I was actually about to piss myself because I'm 15 and they're grown men. And being lost, I ran back to the first house I egged like an idiot. This house is in a cul-de-sac though, and there's a wall that curves, so I followed the wall, hiding behind the parked cars. Because I stuck to the wall, I didn't realize there was an alleyway that would have led to the shop I bought the eggs from. Now I'm sitting behind this car and a man I've never seen before runs past, and I know I have to move, but I was shitting myself. Then he came out of the alleyway and he saw me, of course. Then he ran up to me and dragged me up by my shirt and he started punching me in the face. He was saying something, but it was in a foreign language and I had no clue. Then he got me in a headlock and I was screaming out, "He's gonna ray me," over and over, and then I threw my head back, hitting him in the nose, and he let go, but my stupid coat let him grab the hood and pull me back. But then a few people started coming out of their houses and he was ignoring everybody, and these weirdos didn't even help me. Then his wife opened the door and he was trying to get me inside, and I actually froze. Then I elbowed him and he let go, and then he slammed me down onto these stone slabs he used for stairs or whatever it was. Then a man came over and grabbed gum off me, and I could hear my friends shouting my name, but I didn't say anything because I was too scared. Whilst the men were talking, I called my mom and told her what happened. She asked me where I was, but I didn't know. I tried to run and he slammed me back down onto the stone thing. Then my friends ran down the street when they found me, and they started cussing him out because I had cuts and bruises on my face and neck. Then I tried to run again, but he did the same slamming me down thing, and my friends started cussing him out. Then they rang my mom because we were close like that and they knew the area. The man let me go after the other man spoke to me and told me it was wrong to egg houses, and then the foreign man let me go after I said sorry, and then my mom pulled up at the co-op near the man's house, and then she went ballistic and started driving around looking for his house. She was saying that egging his house doesn't give him the right to touch me and I get it karma, but I literally went to the hospital thinking I had a concussion. Then my mom found the street and me and Gabby pointed it out. Lacey and Paige had left because it was around 11 p.m. on the weekend. Then I can't really say what my mom did but police were called and we had to go. Nothing has been said to us about it since. The moral of the story is don't be stupid. Gunman at the smoke shop. In 2019, my husband and I were out grocery shopping a little later than usual when he realized he needed a new vape, an unhealthy habit that he has quit since this terrifying experience, and something that was never done around our child. Our usual shop closed at 6 p.m., so we Googled local shops and found one that didn't close until 8 p.m. It was 6:45, so we decided this would be the best option so as not to walk into a store too close to closing. Our city is pretty safe, though there are a few areas that see more crime than others. The area this shop was in was a well-populated area that sometimes saw crime, but by no means was it a bad area. My 1-year-old daughter and I stayed in the car while my husband ran inside. It should have been a quick 5-minute or less trip, especially since there were only a couple of other vehicles in the parking lot. My daughter was asleep in her car seat and I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone when a man casually walked into the smoke shop. This barely caught my attention until a large man and woman followed behind the man and stood on either side of the smoke shop doors with arms crossed, almost as if they were guarding the door. I found this weird, but as they were leaning up against the wall and casually chatting, I let it go. Time passed, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all the while this man and woman at the door were staring at me like they were planning something. 20 minutes went by and I started to get really worried. My husband does like to chat and has been known to spend ridiculously long amounts of time on what should be a short trip because he's talking with a clerk or another customer. But given the circumstances with the people out front, I knew something was wrong. I decided to give it another 5 minutes before jumping in the driver's seat and heading to another location to call for help. This felt kind of dramatic, and I remember thinking I was just being paranoid, but I knew in my gut something wasn't right. I continued to casually scroll through articles on my phone, not really absorbing anything but trying to pay attention to my surroundings without raising the suspicion of the people at the door. A minute later, the first man emerged from the shop and all 3 people left the area. A couple of minutes after that, my husband bolted out of the shop, eyes wide and looking terrified. I asked him what was wrong and he just said, "We need to leave now." I kept asking him what happened and he remained silent. After a couple of miles of driving, he pulled into a gas station to collect himself. He put his head in his hands and cried for a moment before wiping his eyes and pulling me into a bear hug. He said that everything was normal when he first went into the shop. He had a casual interaction with the clerk, and as he was surveying his options, the first man came into the store, pulled out a gun, aimed it at the clerk, and began screaming about his money. My husband looked in the other direction and continued to view products as if nothing was happening. The man looked over to see his response and said, "This guy knows what's up." He didn't see anything. My husband didn't acknowledge the man and continued about his business. The man with the gun continued screaming that the man behind the counter had 1 day left to get him his money. After almost 30 minutes of this, the man left. The clerk apologized profusely to my husband, gave him his purchase for free, offered more free products, and begged him not to go to the police because his life would be at stake. To this day, we have no idea what we stumbled into, but I think we all were extremely lucky to have made it out unscathed.